Now, the DJS-1000 is packed full of features, and one of my favorite features is the scale mode. This allows you to take any sample on any pad and play it just like a keyboard, so you can pitch that sample up and down. Now, this works pretty much like an old school sampler, so when you start pitching that sample up, the sample gets shorter and shorter, and when you pitch it down, it gets longer and longer. Now for each pad, there's also a setting to time stretch that sample. So you can put that on master tempo, and what that will do is actually stretch out that sample. So no matter if we pitch it up or down, it will keep the same length. Now, as you can hear, it doesn't sound that great, especially when you start pitching out more than 3 or 4 semitones. It has a really kind of wobbly quality to it, which is not good. That's not what you want on something delicate like a piano or a stab or something like that. You want it really kind of smooth, which is why I usually turn the time stretching off. Now, this has always bugged me because I really want to take advantage of that. I want all the notes to be the same length. I want them to sound nice. I want them to sound proper. And most modern samplers have a way of multi-sampling. Now this means you can load in more than one sample on a single pad and map it across a keyboard so that when you're playing a higher note, it will play a different sample, a higher sample, and when you play a lower note, it will play a lower sample. Now you can't actually do this in the DJS-1000, but I think I found a way. Okay, so let's talk about the scale feature on the DJS-1000. Now, it is something that I do love to use within my performances. It's kind of cool to play melody lines in live, but I always have the time stretching turned off because I can never really make it work with my samples, with my sounds. As you heard before, with a piano, for example, it doesn't sound great when you start pitching up 3, 4, 5 semitones up. It has a really kind of weird wobble when you have that time stretching turned on, which is why I usually have time stretching turned off. It's the same for pads, for strings, for bass sounds. They all have that same kind of weird phasing wobble kind of sound with the time stretching turned on. Now, I don't mind having the time stretching turned off because sometimes that works really well. For example, if you're playing old school style house stabs, for example, that works really well in that kind of function. But sometimes I want to play a piano sound, for example, and I want it to sound like a piano, no matter what kind of semitones I'm playing it up. So if I'm playing it at root, if I'm playing it at +3, +5, +7, I want it to sound like a piano, not a kind of wobbly kind of mess. So I was trying to think of different ways that we can get around this, and because I come from a music production background, it made me think about modern samplers that are built into DAWs that have that kind of multi-sample capabilities. Now with the DJS-1000, you load one single sample into a pad and that is mapped across a whole keyboard. But with multi-samples, you actually load in more than one sample, so 3, 4, 5, 12, 24 samples, and you map them across a keyboard. So no matter what note that you play, it will play the sample that is nearest to that note. So you'll get a much nicer sound out of it. Now, obviously the DJS-1000 doesn't have multi-sample capability, or does it? It kind of got me thinking whether we could do the same kind of thing. With multi-samples, you're kind of putting a different sound on each note, or a different sample, or a different kind of pitched note on each individual key. And I think we can actually do that with the DJS-1000. We actually have the slice mode within here, and that will take a sample and it will cut it up into 16 different slices and put it across the 16 different pads. So it made me wonder, what if we had a different pitch sample on every one of those slices? You take one single sample, have 16 notes on it, going from C, D, E, F, going all the way up, and then you just literally use the slicing to then play different notes. So this is an example of one of those audio files that I created a little bit earlier, and I'm going to show you exactly how I created it. Now this is basically just a normal audio file, a long audio file with 16 notes in it. Now these notes are all equally spaced. That's very important, and we'll come on to that a little bit later when we get this audio file onto the DJS. As you can hear, it's a piano chord. It's actually a C minor ninth, and it starts as a C minor, and then every time it plays, it goes up one semitone. Now, if I switch over to Ableton, I'll show you exactly how I made this. So I've got a MIDI track set up within Ableton, and the plugin I'm using is the M1 by Korg. This is just a very simple piano preset within here. And then I'm also using Ableton's chord MIDI device just to play a chord whenever I hit one single note on the keyboard. So whenever I hit one single note, it will play a certain chord. In this case, it's the minor ninth. I've also got a couple of other audio effects on the end here, but they're really not too important. They're just affecting the sound of the piano. Just know that this is a piano sound. The more important thing is obviously the notes. So I'm going to jump into the MIDI clip here, and now you'll see the notes that you heard play back just a minute ago. And if I play it back, you'll hear it's exactly the same. Now I can make these notes a bit longer if I wanted to, for example. This is all just personal taste, however you want to perform with it. I want these to be quite short and stabby. That's why I'm kind of designing them like this. So when I export that, this is the audio file that it creates. And I've actually labeled this up as C3 Classic Piano. Now I've labeled it C3 because that is the first note within here. That's the root note. So when I load this onto the DJS, I know that the root note is C3, and then every note up from that obviously goes from C3. Now I've also put an E in here as well. I'll come on to that a little bit later. Now, obviously, when I load this into the DJS, then I can play it. And obviously, if my track is in C, then I know that the root note is in C and everything will go together. But what if I'm actually playing another track that's in maybe E, for example? Well, I could still use this C patch. I could still use this C file, but I just need to know that I need to play it up at E, which is, it can be a little bit confusing. So why don't we create a version in E as well? So let's go back over to Ableton. And what I can actually do is I can actually move these notes. So move this up to E. So I can move the root note up to E, and then I can export the same file again, except this time the root is in E. And when I export that, this is the file that it creates. So it sounds pretty much the same. It's just the root is now in E. If I switch back to C, you'll hear the difference. Now, to take this one step further, I've also exported every single key. So say, for example, I exported this as C. I then move all these notes up one semitone and export at C#3. Then I move it up another semitone, export at D, move up another semitone, export at D#, and so on. So I can go through and export all of my root keys just like that. And this is what I've ended up with, all these files. Now I've actually taken it a little bit step further as well, because I've actually exported 2 octaves worth. So I started at C2, did the whole of that octave, then did C3 as well, and did the whole of that octave, just so I have even more possibilities when I start playing. I'll show you how we load these in a second, and it will make a little bit more sense. Now I've also gone through and done a couple of other patches as well. For example, this little synth stab. And this subby style bass. And also this bass sound as well. Of course, it's totally up to you what sounds you want to do. These are just some sounds that I tend to use within my productions, and they might just come in really handy when I'm playing melodies out live. So with all those sounds exported, I've put them into individual folders labeled up by the name of the sound. Now I've actually started calling these patches because these sound files aren't really individual synth sounds or piano sounds or whatever, and they're not loops. They're almost like patches, almost like instrument patches. So that's why I've started calling them patches. But I know when I go into one of these folders, say for example, I know I want this stab sound, the new disco stab sound, I can go into that folder and then I can choose the root key of whatever I want it to match with. So say for example, I'm DJing with a track that is in F sharp. I can go into this new disco folder and then I can find the patch that actually goes with that root key. So the F sharp 2 or the F sharp 3, I can go for either one of those. So that is definitely the hard part over and done with. That's the bit that takes the most amount of time, but getting it onto the DJS-1000 is so easy to do. Just get those audio files onto a USB stick, plug it in, and then go to an empty cell on the DJS-1000 and click Browse. Now, if I navigate to my patches folder, you can see those 4 folders are within there for my 4 different sounds. If I click through to one of those, all those samples are within there. So next up, I need to pick the right sample. Now this is where labeling the sample right comes in handy, because now I'm going to pick a sample that fits with the project that I'm doing, or maybe with the track that I'm DJing along with. So say for example, we're going to be working in F sharp. So I'm going to go through these patches and find the right patch for that. So I'm going to pick the F sharp 2 and we're going to go ahead and use that. So you can see that's now loaded into the first pad within here. And at the moment it's just in normal pad mode. If I press it, it will just play back exactly like the preview did. That's not what we want. So I hit shift and the pad again to stop it playing. And now we're going to go into slice mode. That's how we're actually going to play this back. And now it's ready to start performing with. And as you can hear there, it plays pretty much like the scale mode does. If I hold down the slice button, you'll see all our individual slices and you can see them playing as I play it back. And this is why I mentioned about having those notes equally spaced. It's really important to do because when you import a sample like this into the DJS-1000, it will automatically slice it up over the 16 pads. So by having them all equally spaced and having 16 notes within there, they're all going to be equally spaced and placed over those 16 pads. Let's load a couple more of those patches in so you can see how they sound as well. So as you can see, they all work exactly the same and they all get that automatic slicing, which automatically sets it up on the DJS-1000. There's almost no setup you need to do. Now, I mentioned earlier I was going to explain how I've actually titled up these samples. So you can see at the start of this sample, I've actually got 2 different keys within there, F sharp and A sharp. Now, I've already talked about F sharp being the root of this sample. So when I hit the first pad, that's what I'm going to get. I'm going to get F sharp. So why do I have A sharp in there as well? Well, sometimes I want to play notes that are below the root note. And we've already said that the root note is F sharp for this. So when I hit the first pad within here, that's what I get. I get F sharp. But what if I want to play something below that? Well, there's no pads below that, so I can't actually do that. I can only go up in semitones. So how do I get to those notes below? Well, that's why I've put A sharp in there. A sharp is actually the 5th pad within here. So what I can actually do is load a different patch in, so I can actually make F sharp the 5th pad, and then I can go below that. So say, for example, let's load the F sharp version of this. So we've now got D as our first pad and F sharp as our 5th pad, which means I can use the 5th pad as the root note within this. So I can now play notes below it. Now, of course, this is all completely optional and just something that I've done to customize it to the way that I work. So I can actually use this patch for two different ways. Maybe I could load it in and use it as the root on the first pad for D, or I could use it as the root on the fifth pad for F sharp. It's just the way that I work, and I found it quite handy. It's not something you have to do. It's just something that I found was quite useful for the way that I work. So I think we've just added a fake multi-sample feature to the DJS-1000, and actually the SP-16 as well, because this will work on the SP-16, and it really wasn't that hard to do. Yes, it does take a little bit of time to set up those notes and export all those audio files, but getting it onto the DJS-1000 and performing with it, it just sounds so much better. And you can customize this to be whatever you want it to be. For example, with this, I exported all those notes chromatically, so every single note on the keyboard, but there's no reason why you couldn't export them in a certain scale, for example, maybe a minor scale or a major scale. Then when you export and put these audio files onto the DJS-1000, when you hit those notes, you're only playing in that particular scale. You can't hit a bum note. There's loads of stuff you can do with this, so I definitely recommend having a play around with it. Now, if you want to get hold of any of these patches, I'm actually going to be giving these 4 patches away on this YouTube channel for free. So if you want to get those, they're going to be in the description below, and I'll put a link up there as well. So if you want to get hold of them, definitely click on that link. And also don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I've got a whole load more DJS-1000 stuff, music production stuff, a whole load of stuff on my channel. So definitely check that out. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, and hopefully I'll see you again in the next video.